Hello everyone, thank you for attending my talk today. My name is Dr. Joseph Wilkins. I am currently at Howard University. Today we will talk about innovative methods of plume rise and advances in the field in relation to human health and air quality. I would like to thank my many collaborators for their participation in this research efforts and for the help along the way for the many years that we've collaborated together. As many of you may know, there's been several recent advances in the area of wildland fire research. Some of what we've been looking into is how is that done in a modeling context with the support of observational data sets. So using a 5 years data set from 2008 to 2012, we noticed that there is an apparent increase in PM2.5 by a factor of 4, while also an increase in ozone by a factor of 14%. These are also coupled with the fact that health exposure is location-based. So if you see on the figure to the right, you can notice that in the West Coast, as well as the Central Plains and in the Southeast, there are inherent signatures of wildfire activity. So the figure is just zeroing out fires and using no fires data set. So you're removing all the EGU sources as well as sources such as power plants and things of that nature. Now, with that being said, we're able to look deeper into these instances, and we're able to look at things such as national ambient air quality standards evaluations and how those are impacting cities locally and how much fires can contribute to those impacts. And this is helpful for exceptional events demonstrations as well as source apportionment, figuring out where those enhancements came from. And in a recent study that was conducted over the period of time of 5 years, we've noticed that in the Midwest, biomass burning can lead to 10 to 80 parts per billion of enhancement, depending on how pervasive the source is, such as wildfires. Looking further into research, we have since taken that 5-year study and extended it an additional 5 years to look at a decadal trend in health. So using the Community Vulnerability Index that Anna Rappold and others did back in 2017, we were able to extend that study over the entire United States over this decadal period. And from early results, we've seen that there's, for the entire continental US, about 10% of the population at any given time is exposed to unhealthy air quality. And this is before fire impacts hit those areas. So those folks are already in danger starting off. So some of those people living in the wildland urban interface, such as in the West Coast, are that about 30% of the population. So about 2.5 million persons are living at risk inside of areas that are prone to fire smoke. Looking at this for the Midwest, that number is not 100% set, but it is about 10 to 15% so far. And we're still working to tease out the exact number, as it can be difficult to determine where is the wildland urban interface when there's so many prescribed lands around. How do you consider what area to be impacted by fires or what area to be vulnerable to fires? Not only is human health important, but the environmental health is critical as well, because we have a lot of crops in the Midwest that are highly dependent on good air quality. So one of the recent advances in the Midwestern air quality trends is we've discovered this trend of dirty air getting cleaner. So with dirty air getting cleaner, which means that when the most pervasive situations happen, it used to be about 70 or above parts per billion, and now the dirty air days are starting to become fewer and far between just from natural sources. However, the problem is that the cleaner air is starting to get dirtier. So this means that the background ozone levels are increasing, as well as getting towards that 50 parts per billion on some days and 40 parts per billion on other days on average. Now, this could be problematic when it comes to the growth of plants. As you can see, soybeans, corn, and all these type of plants start to get negatively impacted around 38 to 53 parts per billion. So usually around 40 on average is where you start to see that detrimental effect, as opposed to humans, which is a little bit higher. Now, lastly, we have to acknowledge that these vulnerabilities to plants in the environment are also more largely seen within our vulnerable communities, such as the Black, Latinx, and Native American communities, which may receive about 50% greater risk to adverse health effects such as asthmatic bronchitis and things of that nature. So we have to think about what causes these enhancements to be caused by the ozone. So two of the things that pop out are these things called non-controllable ozone sources. So two of the largest ones are biomass burning and stratospheric transport, tropospheric transport in the area. So the figure to the right kind of gives a demonstration of what this could be. So there's a HMS analysis done on the 30th of August of 2013 from the Rim Fire, and you can see there that there's large amounts of smoke coming from the West Coast. There's large amounts of smoke coming from the central U.S. This smoke combines with different weather patterns, such as this blocking high, to create a situation that's seen on the rightmost part of the figure, where there's elevated smoke coming back down from the stratosphere, as well as smoke being sucked up from the clean air. So you have different types of smoke blending together to create a more detrimental situation that could eventually get evected down to the surface. That smoke is measured using ozone sondes. So ozone sondes are just essentially balloons that can go up to 36 kilometers in the atmosphere before they burst. You get these measurements that kind of take swaths or columns, if you will, of different ozone throughout the atmosphere, as seen on the figure to the right. Now, in the dotted lines is the stratospheric transport and the biomass burning combined. In the solid black lines are the biomass burning signatures, as well as the gray lines is just the stratospheric intrusions by themselves. These together combine to give you your tropospheric ozone as well as your surface ozone enhancements that can be seen. And some of these are eventually evected down to the surface. So what we can see is we can now quantify these non-controllable sources of ozone. And as you can quantify them, you can see their contributions to what could be an exceptional events demonstration. So you have 80 parts per billion up to from biomass burning and up to 15 from stratospheric transport. Now also, we have to notice that in the total column on average during this time period, we saw that it was about 10 to 15% of the ozone was from the stratosphere, 15 to 30% was from biomass burning. And then we noticed that the location that it stemmed from was about 70% from the West Coast, the Intermountain West, and then 3% from the Midwest and 10% from the Southeast. And this demonstrates more of a need to understand the elevated plumes and the high altitude plumes. Knowing what we know now, we know that we can assimilate different data sets into CMAQ or use them as data sets to supplement what CMAQ already has, such as the GOES temporal profile, which gives us an hourly profile for when the fires were burning for large wildfires, and sometimes you can get it for smaller wildfires. As we know from different research studies that I've conducted before, there is an inherent need to get the timing of the fires correct, such as for prescribed burning 3 to 6 hours as opposed to 11 hours and plus 1 when the starting of the fire. This improves the mean bias by 20% and the root mean square error by almost 1,000 meters when it comes to the plume height that the fire is going. So this is just an increase you can get just from getting the temporal profile correct. So looking at those different types of model runs with CMAQ, we can look further into how they look once you actually run the model. And with this case here, you have a GOES visual imagery in figure A, and then you have the baseline CMAQ model run with PM 2.5 shown in B, and then for C, you have the surface 1 hour average PM 2.5 concentration. And then with D, you have this GOES temporal profile 1 hour surface concentration using the different temporal profile. And you can see that they kind of match up at the surface, but once you get to higher elevations, these things can typically change quite a bit. And what we've noticed in a couple studies is that on average you get about 60% of the plume missed if you don't do this, as a lot of the plume does go above the boundary layer that is not always captured in the model runs. And compared with 83% from the observations and 30 to 50% from the alternatives, you can see there's a huge difference in which algorithms you use and as well as what observations you use for reference to see what the difference is there. So this is why we use things like Miser, Calliope, and other model data sets to get that height correct. In conjunction with using different plume rise algorithms, it is inherently important to make sure that you use ground-based instruments such as LiDARs, as well as satellite instruments such as Calliope, Calypso, flies on Calypso, and MISR, and even MIAC. So this is something that we're pushing to do, and this is something that I've been working quite a bit on. As you can see here, like I repeated before, there's about 60% of the smoke that lies above that boundary layer, that 3.5 kilometer level. And the figures shown here are just a HMS map with the kind of smoke that's coming from the Midwest as well as the West Coast. And then you can see here that there's an experimental data showing from 2017 in the Midwest, where there's LiDAR data showing the vertical heights to where a small prescribed burn caused plumes to go up to 3.5 kilometer height. And then you have satellite data on the bottom right to where it shows that from one particular fire on one particular day, heights got up to 6,000 kilometers and sometimes even more. So this is something that you can look into even more in depth, and we created a little table in the bottom left to where you can kind of get a sense of how many air parcels are at these particular heights, and then how much of these are going to a max plume height, which is greater than the PBL height or within the PBL height. And we see that on average about 92% for some of these particular days, and in the total it was about 83% for this one particular fire, the rim fire in 2013, that happened to get plumes above the boundary layer. So this is something that the models need to do better at, and this is something that we're working to incorporate and figure out how to incorporate it, because you don't want to overtrain the model to do this. One of the most important results that we've found is that plume heights can lead to changes in end-user results. Meaning, if you are a epidemiologist, you are a health scientist, you are someone who just uses model output, it is inherently important that you know what is going into your model output, as that model output can largely determine what the results of your study are in terms of where the smoke went, who it impacted, how that changed the hospital visits, and so on and so forth. So for example, we did a quick study here using California, and we noticed that when you look at the mortality rates attributed to fires in itself, if you use the ghost temper profile as opposed to just the base level CMAQ, you can see that the mortality rates found to increase about 47% due to fires alone. So this is a hugely large difference just based off how you set up the model and how that output goes. And then to figure out which one's more valid than the other, you do some cross-referencing between observational data, and you can see here on the bottom left figure that when you compare MIAQ, which is the MODIS product, and CMAQ baseline, there's a fundamental difference between how the plumes are structured and where the heights are going. So CMAQ typically captures where the mean flow is, but it doesn't capture always where the maximum flow is. So you have to find a way to supplement that in order to get your model to work the best. Now, lastly, what we've been developing with Oklahoma University is a look at, can we just make a product that tells us when the smoke is above or within or below the boundary layer? And we've done that. So now we have the ability to tell you, hey, the smoke is here, the smoke was here at this time, and then therefore you can use that as an input to train your model or to look at your model for validation purposes. So this is some of the innovative things and tools we've been creating, and look forward for these to come out soon. Lastly, I want to conclude and leave some ending remarks for those who are interested in this work and want to collaborate and help build more products that are useful for modelers as well as end users. And some things we noticed that quick changes that we could make, and we are working to make, is if we compute plume rise for all small fires, as opposed to just treating them as if they are small smokestacks or put them in the bottom layer. This is something that many researchers have said for many years, and this is something we need to do. And then also, assuming a temper profile matching flaming period is critical to do as well. This is something that we already have the capability to do, and it's something that we've tested, and using things such as Go's temper profile is really helpful in doing that. And we've shown that in a research article that has been presented here. Again, lastly, we want to assume fire-specific temper profiles, again, for wildfires and prescribed, and treat them separately, and then use innovative data sets that we can create from all the suites of NASA satellites and other satellites available. And we want to continue moving the bill forward with those thoughts, and we're willing to accept any help there, and we're going to keep working on these things. So thank you. I appreciate everyone for listening today, and I appreciate your time. Please send me questions, forward me along questions, suggestions, or help, or any type of collaborative opportunities you want. And as well, check out my Twitter page, and I look forward to speaking to you all, and thank you for coming to the conference.